All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Schifferle, and I'm a senior policy analyst in the Office for Older Americans at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I just want to thank you all for inviting me to this presentation for Arlington Village. I think the villages are a really great resource for older adults. And like you've heard, they can also help combat social isolation, which is a risk factor for scams and fraud. So it's great that you all are here to hear about scams and frauds, because we know that the more you know about scams, the less likely you are to lose money to them, and you can share this knowledge with other people in your community. So today what we're going to cover are some trends related to scams and tips on how to avoid them, and then some resources that you can use. And before we begin, I have to give a quick disclaimer on the next slide, please. And that is that this presentation is being made by me, but it does not necessarily represent the opinions of the Bureau. It is just my opinions. And when I answer questions, they are my opinions and not necessarily the opinions of the CFPB. So if you're not familiar with the CFPB and the Office for Older Americans, let me tell you a little bit about us. On the next slide, you'll hear some information about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We regulate consumer financial products and services, and we also educate and empower consumers to make better informed financial decisions. So I work in the Office for Older Americans, where our work is specifically focused on adults who are 62 and older, and also working with financial caregivers and family members who may be supporting older adults. So we both work to help protect older consumers from financial harm and also help people make better financial decisions as they age. So the scam prevention work is part of that. You can find all the information that I discussed today and more about our office at consumerfinance.gov/older-americans. So let me start by setting the stage by talking about some big picture trends about scams. On the next slide, you'll see information from the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Sentinel data, and they have the largest collection of scam-related reports. You can see this is from their 2023 data. So in 2023, the FTC received 5.4 million reports for $10 billion in fraud loss. And that's up from 2022. And this is particularly interesting because we saw a huge increase in scams and fraud loss during the pandemic. And some might think it would taper off or even start to trend downwards, but it still is continuing to increase. So that I find pretty interesting. The slide also shows the top 3 categories of scams the FTC gets, with number 1 being identity theft, number 2 being imposter scams, and number 3 being credit bureaus and credit reporting issues. So we're going to focus mainly on the identity theft and imposter scam issues later in the presentation. But at the bottom of the slide, I just want to point out that you'll see information about financial loss due to scams. So what you see here is that of all the people who reported fraud or scams, only 27% of people reported losing money to the fraud. So that's somewhat good news. So only about 1 in 4 who experience a scam are losing money to it. And we do know that if you can recognize scams, you're less likely to lose money to them, which is why presentations like this are so important. So let's look at some more trends related to age and older adults in scams. The next slide shows interesting data about older adults in scams. Again, this is from the FTC's Consumer Sentinel data. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, it's not the stereotype of the vulnerable older adult. Actually, the data shows that younger adults are more likely to report losing money to scams than older people. So 44% of people in their 20s reported a loss, compared with 25% of people in their 70s. What we do see, however, is that when older adults lose money, what you see on the right side is that they report much higher dollar losses than younger people. So you'll see the median loss of $1,450 for people over age 80, as opposed to $480 for people in their 20s. So you can see from this data that while younger people are more likely to report losing money, when older people lose money, it's usually a larger sum of money. So the next slide actually shows the same thing, but just in a different visualization. Depending how your mind works, this may be easier for you or harder for you, but basically what you're seeing here is with the blue bars, that shows over age the amount of fraud loss. So you can see that it goes up dramatically as people get older, especially in the 70s and 80s. So people are losing more money. But that yellow line going down shows the percentage of people reporting a loss. So you can also see that as people get older, they're less likely to report losing money to scams and fraud. And that's often different than what people expect. So what are the top fraud categories reported to the FTC? On the next slide, you'll see here that the top reports for fraud include imposter scams, online shopping, prizes, investment scams, and business opportunity scams. And if you look at the third column there, the imposter scams and the investment related scams are the biggest dollar losses by far. So we're going to talk about those in a bit. On the next slide, you'll see some data about payment methods. And the reason I go over all the scam data is that at the beginning is just so you can get a sense of, what are the trends in terms of how scams are happening, because then you can better recognize them. And what this shows, the left side of the chart shows how often people use a particular payment method to pay scammers, while the right side shows how much money they lost when using that payment method. So you see the most frequent methods are credit card and debit card on the left side there. But the highest dollar loss, looking at the right side there and the lighter lines, are bank transfers or cryptocurrency. So scammers know that if you pay by those wire transfers or bank transfers or cryptocurrency, it's much harder for you to get your money back. So those are some of the most favorite methods for scammers to request payment these days. And that's also a red flag to look out for if somebody is asking you to pay by cryptocurrency or bank transfer, wire transfer. That could be a red flag for a scam. Now, what about the contact methods? On the next slide, you'll see interesting notes about the contact method that scammers use to reach people. We're all worried about online frauds, but if you look, it's actually email and phone calls are still the most prevalent type of scams that people across all ages are getting. However, the dollar losses, again, the lighter lines show the dollar losses. The dollar losses are highest when you're contacted on a website, social media, or online pop-up ad. The next piece of data I want to just discuss are top fraud losses for ages 60 plus, since we're really focusing on older adults here. And you'll see here that the main ones are investment scams, business imposters, romance scams, and government imposters, and then also tech support scams. So these are the highest dollar losses. And it's similar. Investment scams are the highest dollar losses across all age groups right now. And that's really due to a big increase in cryptocurrency related scams, among other things. But we will focus on some of these top scams in a minute. But that really covers kind of the trend landscape to give you an idea of what we're seeing right now out there. So next, we're going to focus our discussion on tips for recognizing and preventing scams, especially some of those more prevalent or higher dollar loss scams that I just discussed. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the scams I'm going to talk about: the tech support scams, online dating or romance scams, mortgage closing scams, investment scams, and family emergency or imposter scams. We'll also talk a bit about identity theft. But let's start with online dating scams, also called romance scams or sweetheart scams. And these happen when someone meets another person online, usually maybe through a dating app, or it could be through a regular social media platform. And really, they start what seems to be a relationship, but the scammer then soon starts asking for money, often for a fake emergency situation, like an accident or a medical procedure. Or sometimes they say they need money for travel to visit the individual that is their supposed love interest. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the red flags and safeguards of online dating scams. Some of the red flags is they often want you to wire the money or send it by cryptocurrency or prepaid card or gift card, or they may want to access your bank account. Now, if you know someone who's been involved in one of these romance scams, you can understand that they really pull on people's heartstrings. So it can be really difficult to convince someone that it is in fact a scam. But if you do notice somebody in your community withdrawing a large sum of money to wire it out of overseas, and that's out of character, or someone comes into the bank or credit union while you're there and they're still on the phone with the scammer, those can also be red flags. But the big tip off is if the love interest is asking for money for an emergency for travel and the person hasn't met that love interest yet. Also consider how they're asking the person to pay. If they're asking for wire transfer, prepaid, or gift cards, those are red flags. So to protect against these online dating scams, we asked people to share some of these tips on the right side here. The big thing is not to send money or give access to accounts to someone you have not met in person, and just limiting other financial and personal information shared online, because these are sophisticated criminal enterprises. There are call centers set up overseas. There are criminals that are using the same fake profiles to target hundreds of people. And people can also do a reverse image search if they're not sure. If you know someone who's in this situation, you can ask them if they have a picture and try to do a reverse Google image search. And oftentimes you'll see that it is a scam. Some other things to look out for is the next slide shows some of the top lies that these criminals use. These are based on an FTC data spotlight where they looked at a lot of romance scam complaints and found out what are scammers telling them. So the top things are saying that somebody is sick, hurt, or in jail. Another big one right now is teaching you how to invest, especially in cryptocurrency. Sometimes they'll even show you their bank account and show you that they have millions of dollars and say they got it by investing in cryptocurrency, and they'll teach you how to get rich by investing in cryptocurrency too. And then what they actually do is tell you how to send your information to them via cryptocurrency. They make it sound like they're teaching you how to invest, but really they're teaching you how to send your money to them, the criminals. So other common scenarios are saying they're in the military or far away, or they need help with a delivery or travel or things like that. Or sometimes it may be they're on an oil rig or ship. During COVID, that gave them an excuse why they couldn't meet people. So these are just some of the lines that these scammers use and some things to look out for in terms of red flags. On the next slide, you'll see some interesting trends about what payment methods romance scammers are requesting. So you see the financial losses are the greatest when cryptocurrency or bank transfers are the method of payment. We saw that earlier for all types of scams, but that really rings true here for the romance scam. And it's really interesting trend because if you look over time, 5-6 years ago, the romance scammers almost always asked for gift cards because that was the way they knew they could get your money and run, and it would be very hard to get money back. Now they're asking for cryptocurrency. That's the reddish orangish color on the far left that has the most dollar losses, or bank wire transfer payment, and the greenish color, that's the next highest dollar losses. So those are other things to look out for in terms of these romance scams. If you hear someone talking about a new love interest who's asking them to send them money in cryptocurrency, teaching them how to invest in cryptocurrency, or asking for large wire transfers, those could be good red flags to talk to them about. This may be a romance scam. And we do have, on the next slide, you'll see what we call our fraud prevention placemats. We have a whole series of placemats that we designed originally for places like Meals on Wheels that were delivering meals to people at home. And with them, they would get one of these brightly colored fraud prevention placemats with a message about a different scam. This is the one about romance scams. And we found once we created these that a whole lot of other places like to order them too, not just meal delivery programs, but libraries, financial institutions. The villages are welcome to order them. You're welcome to order them as individuals. Everything's free from the CFPB. You can find it consumerfinance.gov/order. So if you go out and give presentations in your community or want to have them in your neighborhood library or a senior center, you are welcome to just order them and have them there. And this one is on romance scams, and you'll see some on some of the other scams as well. So next I want to talk about tech support scams. While romance scams are one of the highest dollar losses affecting older adults, so those are big dollar scams or romance scams. People lose tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it can be very devastating emotionally too, because people say they lose not only the money but the life they thought they were going to have with this supposed love interest. But the tech support scams, while they are lower dollar losses, usually like $300 to $500, this is one of the most common scams that almost everybody sees. I don't know who hasn't gotten a pop-up telling them that there's a virus on their computer, or a phone call saying that, sometimes they mimic the names of a reputable tech company, or they could say they're Microsoft calling, but they're not. And what they do here is they tell you that they found a virus on your computer. Sometimes they'll say they need to remote in to make an update or remove the virus. Other times they'll tell you to call tech support, or they'll give you a link to click on, which actually then can install malware into your computer. So the next slide shows some red flags and some safeguards about tech support scams. To help people guard against tech support scams, some of the tips that we give are: never give control of your computer to someone who calls you out of the blue. Microsoft and these other companies do not make it a practice to call people and tell them that they have viruses on their computer. So if you get a call like that, you can be pretty certain that it is in fact a scam. And also, if you get pop-ups like that, don't click on links in these unsolicited pop-ups or emails, because they can download malware, which then can take information from your computer. And if you get a pop-up, it can be pretty scary, because it sometimes says you're going to lose all your data. You may lose all your photos of all your family, or they can say they can get to your personal information, which if you do taxes on your computer can also be very scary, but it's often just a scam. So just turn off the computer, turn it back on, and oftentimes that pop-up just disappears. Another tip is to think about setting your antivirus to auto update. That way you don't have to worry about doing and installing all the updates if it's on auto update. So on the next slide, you'll see another one of the fraud prevention placemats that I described earlier. This one is tips for online safety tips, some of which can help you with tech support scams and with avoiding other online scams. Things like locking your devices and using strong passwords. So usually that means at least 12 characters long. We usually say longer is stronger. Sometimes people use passphrases like, I love the New York Yankees or something, but maybe change the E to an ampersand, or things like that, that are easier to remember but longer. Also knowing the red flags of the scam. So you all are doing that now by attending this, and you can share what you learned here with other people. And again, this is one of the placemats that you can order online for free at consumerfinance.gov/order. And now let's talk about investment scams. This is the number one dollar loss right now. It's a new trend in the past couple of years that investment scams are such a high dollar loss scam. And these can be, simple, old-fashioned type investment scams. On the next slide, you'll see these can target people who are savvy investors as well as people who are more new to investing. And it can be things like saying to put all your money into what they say is a no-risk investment. It's actually very risky. Or to take money and say, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Sometimes they're even someone from your neighborhood or community or faith group, so you trust them more, and they may take advantage of that trust. So some things to look out for in terms of red flags and safeguards for investment scams are on the next slide here. So if someone's pressuring you to act quickly before it's too late, and if they say their results are guaranteed or no risk, those are big red flags. If they tell you to leave everything to them, that's also a red flag. And if they want to explain their payment structure, there may be something in it for them. Also, if they ask you to put all your money in one investment, it's like the old adage, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's a red flag if you're being asked that. Some tips to avoid investment scams. Some things a lot of people don't know about is that you can check the background of a broker, brokerage firm, or investment advisor at finra.org. You can also, the SEC also has a website, investor.gov, where you can check out investment advisors before you use them. And you can also interview them, ask them questions about how to file a complaint or how they're paid. And just to take your time and do research, and beware of the cryptocurrency investment scams, especially right now. I think most of us don't fully understand cryptocurrency and how it works. So just be very aware that there are a lot of scammers out there supposedly teaching you how to invest in cryptocurrency that are actually out there to try to take your money. So those are some things to look out for in terms of those investment scams. Another scam I want to focus on, especially since in the DMV area, we tend to have a higher cost of living, but also like higher equity in our homes, especially if people have lived there for a while, or higher value for homes in some parts of the country. So these mortgage closing scams can be particularly detrimental. And what happens here is that scammers are taking advantage of home buyers during the closing process. And this can be if you're refinancing your home to age in place, or it can be if you're selling your home, maybe to move to assisted living or to a senior living community. So what they do is, through a very sophisticated phishing scam, they try to divert your closing costs and down payment into a fraudulent account. They send you something that says there are last minute changes to your wiring instructions and to send it somewhere else. And it can look very official. They are doing what's called business email compromise, where they try to make it look like it's coming from your real estate agent or your settlement attorney. So these can often appear as very legitimate conversations with your real estate agent or settlement attorney. And this can really result in the loss of people's life savings, because usually that down payment they're putting on a house, or whatever money they're wiring for the house, is the largest chunk of money that most people transfer in their lives. So the next slide has some information about the mortgage closing scams that I was just discussing. The main thing to look out for is that last minute change to wiring instructions. And on the next slide, you'll see red flags and safeguards, again, to help you recognize these scams. Some red flags are that last minute change to the wiring instruction, and especially if they ask you for financial information by phone or email. This type of sensitive data a legitimate real estate agent or broker would not ask for by phone or email. It would be through a secure link. So if you're unsure, or if you get any kind of last minute changes, we suggest that you call back both your agent and your settlement attorney at the number you know to be correct, not at whatever number you're given by the person asking you for these last minute changes, and verify any changes before sending any money. The CFPB also has a mortgage closing checklist that can be useful to people. I mean, a lot of older adults have bought multiple homes over the years and probably know how to do this better than anyone, but it's also something you can share with children or grandchildren when they're buying their first home. It can walk them through the steps to take when buying a home and getting a mortgage. Now, if somebody does send money in one of these mortgage closing scams, it's important to contact your bank or wire transfer company immediately and ask for a wire recall. Really reporting the error as soon as possible increases any likelihood to recover the money. There's also, the FBI has something called the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which you can find at ic3.gov, ic3.gov. And that is a really good place to report these types of high dollar losses because they actually have what's called a financial fraud kill chain where they can try to get the money back for you if you do report it quickly. So those are the mortgage closing scams. And I'm next going to talk about imposter scams and identity theft. But I also want to just mention that for all these types of scams, these are often sophisticated criminals. So nobody should be ashamed or embarrassed if they do send money to one of these scammers. It happens to all sorts of people across the age spectrum. So it is very important to report them as well, because that helps federal agencies like CFPB and FTC to shut down the scams and to put the scammers in jail. So let's talk next about one of the common imposter scams, and that's a family emergency scam. I hope that nobody got this call, because it sounds like a very particularly scary call where they call you and say they're usually crying or upset to disguise their voice. And they say, "Grandma, Grandpa, I'm in trouble. Please don't tell Mom or Dad. I'm stuck in jail in another country. I need you to wire money right away." Or they may say, "I just got in a car accident and I need money for hospital bills. Please send the money right away, and don't tell other family members." And now with AI, we're keeping a very close look on that, because with voice cloning, we know they can clone people's voices and make this type of family emergency scam even more believable. So again, if you do get a call like this, it's very important to contact family members to check it out before sending any money, even though they're telling you not to. Do check with Mom or Dad, or check with the grandchild. Send them a text or something and see, and they may just reply and say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm in math class." That's a scam. So check it out before sending any money, even though it's designed to rush you and play on your emotions. And it's a very effective and scary scam, but it is important to check out before wiring money. Another one is the IRS imposter scam. And while this is less emotional, it does play on everybody's fear about owing taxes and getting audited. So you get a call from the IRS saying you owe back taxes, and they'll say that there's a case against you. They may say they're going to put you in jail. They may say you owe a lot of money for people who they know are not in the country legally. They sometimes threaten arrest and deportation. And they can spoof the IRS's phone number. So it'll look like it's coming from a 202 number in DC from the IRS, but it can be coming from overseas in another country or in a total different part of the United States. So again, they tell victims that they owe back taxes and try to play on their fear of that in order to get you to give either personal information or tax information, or to pay them. So some big red flags there are if you're asked to pay someone over the phone, and also, if it is the IRS calling about back taxes. If you're not sure if you owe back taxes, you can go directly to irs.gov/balance due to check if you owe back taxes, rather than engaging over the phone. Fortunately, there have been some law enforcement actions that shut down a bunch of call centers in India that were engaging in this IRS imposter scam, and since then these calls have become less frequent, but they still do happen. So it's still important to know about these government imposters. They can impersonate anyone too. They've impersonated Social Security, Medicare, FTC, CFPB, so be very wary of those as well. The last example I want to talk about is identity theft. So probably most people are familiar with identity theft, and it's basically just when anybody uses or misuses your personal information in order to get goods or services. It can be your Social Security number, it can be your health insurance number, it can be your credit card number. So the next slide has some safeguards against identity theft. Sometimes you can do everything right and still be a victim of identity theft, just like any other crime or fraud. But some things you can do to try to protect yourself a bit are to protect your Social Security number, especially. Don't hand that out unless you absolutely need to. A lot of places will ask for it and don't really need it if you're pushed back and ask them what they needed, and if you can leave that part blank. Sometimes you will have to put it down, but a lot of people are using it that don't need to be using it, and the less you have that out there, the better. Also good to protect incoming and outgoing mail, especially like if you're sending out taxes, not to put those in the outgoing mail slot because people may come by and take it, especially if they see it's directed to the IRS, but rather go right to the post office. Signing up for direct deposit can be a really good thing, especially for Social Security checks and other federal benefits checks. We know that during the pandemic, some of those benefits checks were subject to fraud and misdirection. So direct deposit can help to avoid that. Also good to monitor bank accounts and review your credit report or credit record at least annually at annualcreditreport.com. You can check it for free more often than that now. So depending on how much exposure you feel like you've had or whether you've been a victim of identity theft in the past, you may want to check it more often, but at least annually, it's good to check for free at annualcreditreport.com and make sure that nobody is misusing your identity or personal information. So the last thing I want to talk about before I get to your questions and show you a few resources is just our report about recovering from elder financial exploitation. So there's lots of reports about fraud loss, but very few about how to recover and get your money back and what are the factors that affect whether someone gets your money back. So a couple of years ago now, we issued this report which looked at that question about what are the factors that affect recovery. And you'll see on the next slide here the framework that we developed and outlined in terms of the 4 stages that represent whether you'll get your money back. The first is you have to identify that the fraud occurred. The second is reporting it. The third is investigation. And the fourth is return of funds. So I'll look at these each briefly in turn. On the next slide, you'll see factors that identify whether people that affect whether people actually identify the elder financial exploitation. So one of those is the method of the transaction. If you pay by credit card, then you're more likely to cover. Sometimes the credit card companies even identify the fraud for you and give you a call and let you know. Personal financial situation can affect it. Someone with more limited income may be more likely to notice any amount of money lost. Also depends just sort of your attention to these types of issues as well. Some people are just more likely to notice those things or have regular alerts set up. Whether the person knew the perpetrator is a big factor too to identifying it. If it's a stranger scam, like a lot of the ones we discussed today, that you may be more likely to recognize it than if it's a family member or a friend who's exploiting you and taking your information. Somebody's health, including their physical health and cognitive ability, may also affect whether they're able to identify elder financial exploitation. So if it doesn't get identified, you're not going to get your money back. If it does get identified, the next stage is reporting. So on the next slide, you'll see some factors that affect whether financial exploitation actually gets reported. Again, it's the method, amount of transaction, affects whether people are more likely to report. Also, whether the victim knew the perpetrator. Sometimes if it is a friend or family member, they may be less likely to report because they don't want that person affected or they feel sorry for them. Sometimes we see exploitation by a family member who has a drug or alcohol problem, and the older adult may not want to, turn in that family member. So we also found that another factor is just shame and embarrassment, especially with older adults. When we interviewed them, a lot of people blame themselves or said, oh, it was my fault. It was just a bad investment. That's on me. There's a great sense of personal responsibility in older generations that I'll say I don't necessarily see in the younger generations, being kind of in between myself. But so that affects too whether people report, as does their health. And faith in authorities played a big role, especially for LGBTQ people and people of color who had prior negative experience with local police and didn't want to get the police involved. in this matter either. So those are some of the factors we identified as affecting reporting. And again, if you don't report, it's very hard to get your money back. And the next part of recovery and getting money back is investigation. And this slide shows some of the factors that come into play here. There are a lot of the same cross-cutting factors that you saw in the earlier stages, like the method or amount of transaction. But a couple of factors unique to this stage are the complexity of the investigation may affect whether it gets investigation. If it's really complex, especially with overseas defendants, it might not get investigated. Also, if the amount of loss is low, even if it's a high amount for the individual, it may be a lower priority for prosecutors to actually, and for investigators to actually pursue the case. Finally, return of funds is the last stage we identified in terms of recovery. And you can see why it's often so hard to get money back once you do lose it to scammers. You first have to get through those first 3 stages. And then even if you get to that, then it comes to returning the funds. And oftentimes return of funds is limited by the perpetrator's ability to repay. So professionals we talked to noted that oftentimes by the time the perpetrator's caught, the money's gone and they might not have other assets to repay the older adult with. And even when the court orders repayment, sometimes there's a repayment plan with very small amounts over years. And so for a very older adults, that can mean that they even sadly might pass away before a substantial portion of the money is repaid. So you can see the recovery can be very difficult, and that's all the more reason that it's important to recognize and prevent scams before they happen. So that's why we are talking about that today. And the last thing I want to mention before I get to your questions are just some resources that we have available to you. The first one is called Money Smart for Older Adults. This is an awareness program that we developed along with FDIC, and you can order it again for free in bulk. We have it in English and in Spanish, and it's designed for those of you who may go out in the community and give your own presentations. Or if you just want to learn yourself, you can just order the resource guide. If you want to go out and present, there's also an instructor guide and a fully scripted PowerPoint that you can use. It covers a lot of the scams we mentioned today, plus a whole lot more. We also have guides to help people make informed decisions. On the next slide, you'll see a bunch of different topics that we cover, including reverse mortgage, financial advisors, pension, lump sum buyouts. So if you're wondering about specific issues that we haven't necessarily discussed today, you can go again to consumerfinance.gov/older Americans and see a lot of our other materials. Now, we mentioned reporting. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you where to report fraud and identity theft. So if you or someone you know has received a call or an online interaction that you think is a fraud or scam, you can report it to the FTC at reportfraud.ftc.gov. And if it's identity theft, then the website is identitytheft.gov, and that'll actually walk you through all the steps to take to try to recover from identity theft, including giving you a personal recovery plan, depending on the type of identity theft that you experienced. On the next slide, you'll see how to report to the CFPB, my agency, at consumerfinance.gov/complaint. You can submit to us for financial issues, so financial companies that may not be fixing errors. So if you have a problem with a financial product or service like a credit card or a checking account or a student loan or a mortgage loan, we do first suggest that you reach out to the company and try to resolve it. But if that doesn't work, then you can submit a complaint to the CFPB and tell us about the issue. We actually forward it to the company and work with them to get a response, usually within 15 days. So you can submit a complaint to us about things like loans, mortgage loans, student loans, payday loans, auto loans, checking, savings accounts, credit cards, credit reporting, debt collection, money transfers. And it can be really helpful to submit a complaint because we do send it to the financial institution. And sometimes when they get the complaint from us, then they will respond more readily or differently to the consumer, more favorably, knowing that the federal agency is involved as well. And now the last slide here has some of our contact information. I've mentioned our website, consumerfinance.gov/older Americans. That will get you to all the information related specifically to older adults. And I'll take your questions now, but if you have any questions afterwards, you can email us or thoughts or ideas or other presentations that you want. You can email us at olderamericans@cfpb.gov, or my personal email is at the bottom of this slide as well. And with that, I will be happy to take your questions. Let me see.
You're on mute, Carolyn.
Chat.
Carolyn, take yourself.
Oh,
I'm sorry. There we go. I'm sorry. You mentioned in romance scams that scammers are asking for cryptocurrency. That doesn't seem like it would be very effective with seniors who may not be very well versed in crypto. Are they? So is it? Are they asking?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what they're doing is they're playing on people's lack of knowledge about cryptocurrency, and they're saying, I'm going to walk you through how to learn. I'm going to teach you how to invest in cryptocurrency. And they'll spend a lot of time because it's worth it, because they get a lot of money out of people teaching you how to invest in cryptocurrency. And they'll even walk you. What they often do is tell you where a crypto ATM machine is. And those are now being more and more prevalent, like in gas stations, mini marts, and other places. And they know, the scammers know where they are. So they may even look up where you live, and they may know there are 5 crypto ATMs in Arlington. I'm just making up that number, and then direct the person exactly where to go in order to send money by crypto using a crypto ATM. So just like they used to like direct people where to go to buy gift cards and stay with them on the phone while they do it, they'll do that with crypto ATMs.
Oh, interesting. So you say to report some scams to the CFPB. Should we also report them to our local police?
Yes, and in fact, most scams should be reported to the FTC rather than the CFPB at reportfraud.ftc.gov. For CFPB, we take more of the complaints related to the financial issues and credit cards and credit reports. But depending on the nature of the scam, you may want to report it to the police, or identity theft, or also sometimes there may be local consumer protection agencies that can help you out. And if it's a large dollar loss, I would also report it to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Virginia and see if it's something they would be willing to prosecute, or the U.S. Attorney's Office if it's a cross boundary, cross state federal issue.
Okay. And you were talking a little bit about IRS scams. Do they ever actually call you about back taxes, or do they usually send letters? I mean, when I've had problems.
That's a really good.
So when I've had problems with the IRS, they've always said,
yeah, that's a great question. Exactly. And we used to tell people point blank that that's how you could recognize a scam, is that the IRS would never call you. But then about 4 years ago or so, they started hiring third-party debt collectors so that people could sometimes get a legitimate call from one of these entities that's calling on behalf of the IRS. But the caveat is that you are supposed to first get a letter. It used to be that you could say that any call claiming to be from the IRS is a scam. Now it could be legit, but you should first get a letter with a PIN on it, and that person calling claiming to be from the IRS should know the PIN. So you should get a letter first, and the person calling should actually know the PIN that matches your letter. And again, I would just say, just don't even engage with somebody who calls you claiming to be from the IRS. Just say, I'm going to check at irs.gov/balance due, or call the IRS back.
Yeah, I worked for the IRS for 30 years, and that's true. We do tend to reach out first letter, giving the taxpayer the information about how they can repay it. The debt collector usually comes in after the fact. In other words, if their person's not responding. So you're right. You should expect a letter before any call.
All righty. I want to point out that Steve has very kindly put the websites down of some of the people we might want to contact if he, about fraud if you've been a victim. So you all might want to take a look at that. Let's see, what else do we have? What's the difference between scam/fraud and having your email or Facebook account hacked? Is there any danger to the individual when their accounts are hacked?
Yes, I mean, that's a form of identity theft or fraud, is to have your accounts or email hacked. And there is potential danger because they can send out messages to all your contacts, making it look like you. I mean, most of us have probably gotten an email or a Facebook message from somebody we know that wasn't really that person, but rather a scammer who hacked in. So that's a danger. And plus, once they hack into your email in particular, they can get all sorts of personal information. So what we do advise people, if they believe they've been hacked into, is to change their passwords, and also to contact the provider, whether it's like Facebook or Instagram or whoever it may be, or Hotmail or Gmail, to let them know that you believe your account has been hacked.
All righty. Let's see if we have anything else. Jump to the latest. We have a note: beware of WhatsApp calls from an overseas numbers that you don't recognize. This person got one yesterday from a 62 number, which is actually in Indonesia. So she says scam likely. That's interesting.
That's a good tip. Yes.
And there seems to be some kind of Zelle scam where someone receives money from someone and then receives the text asking for it back. I'm not sure how that works, as it is my understanding that money sent through Zelle is gone. Are you aware of this one?
Well, that sounds like a type of money mule scam, like basically where people ask for money and then ask for money back. Sometimes it can be done for money laundering, but yeah, with Zelle, they can do it just basically saying, "Oh, I sent you money. Oops, it was a mistake. Send it back," type of thing. And it is true. We are looking closely at the P2P payment fraud space because there are not the same protections with those apps as there are necessarily with credit cards. So that is definitely something to keep an eye out for, is those fraud through those peer-to-peer payment methods. And also, anytime somebody asks you to, they give you a check and they say pass on a portion to someone else, that's a red flag for a money mule type scam.
And Pat, you say you have something you want to share.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I've been using this service provider for over 10 years, and I pay him by check. And he reported a check that I had given him as lost, so I wrote him another check. And then when I checked my bank account, I found out that the original check had been altered. So I called the bank immediately and they stopped payment. They were very good. They were really swift. And then I asked my service provider about it, and he apologized profusely because he had lost the original check. So it was, it wasn't an on purpose kind of scam. However, calling the bank right away and stopping payment on the original check was the way to go. And they were very good about it. And it was obvious that the check had been altered. So I just wanted to let everybody know that, sometimes if you're checking your accounts and stuff and you find something, call that company immediately, call the bank or whoever right away, and they can certainly help you immediately.
Good advice. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That is very good advice, to call right away, because you're far more likely to stop the transaction or get your money back if you alert the financial institution or the payment method transactor right away. So, and there also is a trend of check washing right now, where people are stealing checks in the mail and they're, washing out the what was written in and then rewriting in new numbers, which is why we do also recommend direct deposit for a lot of things.
Is there an ink that they can't wash off?
There are inks that are harder to wash off than some, like they say that felt ink is better than ballpoint ink. So there are some, yeah, and someone's saying that they've purchased checks that are supposedly harder for thieves to check wash with. Yeah, there are pens that you can use that make it harder to wash off. That is true.
Yeah, I think we've had some problems with this, people taking checks out of post office boxes and washing them in Arlington. Does your agency work with attorneys general offices throughout the country to try and recover money lost through a scam? Yes. Oops.
Absolutely. Both the CFPB and the FTC work with attorney generals, both on the consumer education front and also in enforcement actions. We'll often bring joint enforcement actions with attorney general's offices to get money back for scammers. I mean, one example is the Brightspeed case where we got money back for people who lost money to tech support scams. We got millions of dollars back for consumers who had paid money to tech support scammers. And then Brightspeed was the payment processor who was knowingly allowing people to use their platform knowingly allowing scammers to use their platform for these tech support scams without doing anything about it. So that's how we were able to get them on the hook and get money back for consumers.
Wow. And this person says they've purchased checks that are harder for thieves to alter, less able to be washed, and pens, like you said, felt tip that is harder to wash off. Let's see, anything else? I think I've gotten to the end of it. Does anybody else have any questions? Or want to share any experiences?
I was just going to say, you know, a lot of our seniors are so used to writing checks, they don't really trust direct withdrawals or direct payments online, but they're writing so many checks and this or that. It's really, that online payment stuff is great. I always tell people, you know, they send you, I mean, they'll still send you statements if you want, but they send you emails or, you know, they notify you a million times before they take money out of your account. So that helps.
Yeah.
And I was just going to reinforce what Lisa said earlier about if you're on your computer and you suddenly got this notice, and not only do you get the notice, but you get this loud blaring, which just scares you to death. And Lisa, you said the exact right thing. I checked with my computer consultant who said, just turn your computer off and just leave it off for a few minutes and then turn it back on and it'll be gone. And so, but you don't know what to do. And you know, you're so rattled from getting this sound that you don't think about just turning it off, and then that'll get rid of that notice and you'll be fine. So I would you told us about today that it's hard to remember those presentation today, Lisa. We really thank you. So, and there's lots and lots of good information.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So it's 11 o'clock. And so I guess we are finished with coffee and conversation. And